This presentation gives a brief introduction to the Tales of the Tribes research on animation as a tool for Indigenous representation. I think I'm a bit of an odd one out here, not only because of my nationality and cultural background, but also because most of the presentations seem to have been about the tangible heritage, and my research is about the intangible heritage. It's also about practice and research, so that's like animation practice and research. So this project is about storytelling, it's about animation, and it's about using animation as a tool to represent tribal identities. So I will talk about what has been done, what needs to be done, and then I'll finally talk about the screening and evaluation and the future. Storytelling was also a community activity. The stories that were passed down from generation to generation through oral retellings fulfilled an interactive function between the teller and the listener, and in this way, they constituted a co-creative project. The role of storytelling for maintaining group solidarity and identity is significant in light of the revelations from the participants of this research about declining traditional narrative practice and the evidence of the parallel destabilization of communal identities. This work is founded on traditional storytelling. In Indigenous communities in India, the stories are mostly known by the elders, that is, the parents, the grandparents, and the traditional priest. This slide gives a brief glimpse into the commercial animation industry in India that produces animation targeted at mass audiences, and therefore the representation is one of homogenization. In post-colonial India, marginalized cultures are not communicated in animated films produced in India, and this conveys a sense that they are outdated and backward to the young generation. This project was supported as a PhD by Bournemouth University. A qualitative methodology of practice-led research was engaged to address the research question: can participatory practice be used to reconnect the young generation with existing cultural forms and practices, and if so, how? Here I refer to participatory practices. I'm really talking in this context about participatory animation filmmaking. So can participatory animation filmmaking be used to connect the young generation with existing cultural forms and practices? Because the research shows that the young people are losing touch with their oral storytelling traditions. So focus group interviews and one-to-one interviews are used to record the inputs and responses from the participants and audiences in this work. This research was carried out through 5 case studies. 4 of them are located in northeast India and 1 in central India. The experimental artistic animation practices explored in this practice-led research project to produce a sample collection of animated films connect with Indigenous artistic traditions. In India, animation is very much about, and in fact worldwide it's about, these days it's more and more about technology and commercial animation production and mass audiences. In our project here, we have been using experimental animation practices and artistic practices to, which relate more to the traditional practices. So there are 2 aims to working with local communities and young Indian animators to co-create animation films. Firstly, to sustain Indigenous stories, which are being forgotten, and then also to communicate tribal culture to wider audiences. Now I will briefly summarize the stories of the films and show how they were made. The creation story of the Pardhan Gons is the first in this collection of films. It's a sample collection of 5 short films They are animated adaptations of tribal stories from India, and the first one in the series is the story from the Pardhan Gons, the creation story of the peacock. This project brought traditional and digital artists together in the workshop environment. This illustrates working with traditional Pardhan Gond artists and musicians, and also with young Indian animators. In this particular case, they are graduates from the National Institute of Design. Most tribal stories, they do have a moral, and this story reminds the village person of the value of being content with what you have. The next story in the series is Man, Tiger, Spirit, the story from Nagaland. And it's actually nice to see somebody here who has worked on that film today. Russell, he is there. He's here today, and he's the one who is animating using cowrie shells there. And so it's this mixture of handmade animation techniques and then also using computer technology. This slide highlights the local engagement in the story from Nagaland that took place in 2011. Again, the story has a message, mankind's interconnectedness with and distance from nature and the supernatural. The third story in the series is from the lecture of Sikkim. This short film explores the tanka designs of the Buddhist communities of the Himalayas for the art style. We collaborated with the Namgyal Institute of Tibetology for a workshop to develop this animated adaptation. We had local advice about communicating the Buddhist sentiments and culture of the region in the film. We also collaborated with local musicians and young artists from the Directorate of Handloom and Handicraft in Gangtok. And technically skilled young Indian animators brought the hand-painted characters to life. The fourth story in this series is Abutani from the Tani tribes of Arunachal Pradesh. Most of the other photographs you've seen in this little presentation so far have come from that Abutani production that took place in Arunachal Pradesh. So I'm not going to show you any more pictures right now on that film, but I'm going to move on to the last film in the series, which is the Meitei story from Manipur called Tapta. So for all of these animation films, I've collaborated with local organizations, with local state government organizations, and with young artists and cultural consultants in each one of these places. The workshop in Manipur involved young artists and graduates from the College of Art in Imphal. Dr. Verrier Elwin was born in England, and during his lifetime, he was one of the best-known anthropologists in India. However, little is known about Dr. Elwin's lifetime activism towards recognizing the value of Indian tribal art and culture. As Elwin wrote in his book, A Philosophy for Nefa, I am not one of those who would keep tribal art as it is. Our approach to everything in life must be creative and dynamic. This project introduces Elwin to the young generation as the storyteller who brings these short films into a larger narrative, that of a storytelling competition, with a trophy for the story that is chosen as the favorite in the collection by young audiences. So far, we have not been able to identify the support that we require for a small team of people who are waiting to produce the remaining animation and master the program. Therefore, this is my priority, so that once this is done, I can fulfill my proposal for the INTACH-IIC scholarship to dub the films into the local languages of the people represented with the help of the regional chapters of INTACH, and then to screen the films to local audiences to record and evaluate the responses in this year ahead. I end this presentation with a thank you to INTAC for the award and an appeal for your help and support to complete this last stage of a very original, innovative project that has brought young traditional and digital artists in India together to explore and reinterpret Indigenous storytelling for modern young audiences. So for the future, we have now been developing this model for Indigenous young people to be able to produce local animation for local audiences, to be able to tell their stories using digital media and digital technology. And this project and this last remaining phase of dissemination and evaluation that has been supported by the INTAC scholarship, that needs to be done in order to continue to develop Indigenous media in India, because it is going ahead in other parts of the world that tribal communities are able, young people are using animation to tell their own stories. And we are developing this in India. Thank you very much.